What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Wing and Tail Boys podcast, your Northeast hunting and fishing destination. I'm Chris,
And I'm Angelo.
and we're your hosts. Join us as we navigate the woods and waters of the Northeast, sharing our passion for the outdoors.
Whether it's land management, outdoor recreation, hunting, or fishing, we're going to cover it all. With 40 plus years of experience in the Northeast, we'll provide insights, tips, and stories to help you make the most of your adventures and help you experience the wild.
So, tune in, grab your gear, and let's hit the woods together. And always remember, success is just a commitment away. What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Wing and Tail Boys podcast. Today, I am going solo. I am joined by awesome guest, Dorge of Firenock. How you doing today, Dorge?
I'm doing quite well. How are you, Chris?
I'm doing very great. We are finally getting some precipitation here in the Northeast. I don't know if you're aware, but we haven't really had much of anything over the last 3 months. It has been dry as a bone.
Well, we got our first snow the day before, so we can finally see what the deer is doing.
Exactly. So we went from no precipitation at all to almost every single day rain and snow. It's like we're on two extremes of the spectrum. So with that being said, I'm really excited because you and I, we've been planning this little series for a pretty long time now. For our listeners here, Dorge and I, we're going to be starting a series basically called Arrow Science and Arrow Building. It's a series all about the science of arrows, the science of arrow flight, and how we can build arrows to maximize the efficiency of our system based on what we want, how we want to use it, and what our limits are as far as draw length, draw weight, so on and so forth. A few months back, I don't know if you guys remember, I think it was episode 7. We had Dorge on and we kind of started this, and we realized that we kind of jumped into the deep end without our swimmies on, and things got things got a little out of hand, a little quicker than we expected, and we realized that this topic isn't something that we could cover in 1, 2, or 3 podcasts. It's really something that we need to take our time with, get in depth to, and if we need to, split an episode in half or record it in 2 or 3, and just kind of take it where it goes.
I think we have a small discussion that if you recall. This is very in-depth because just like me being a retired physics professor, I really think that a lot of fundamental, the principle, the backbones, the foundation need to be built before we move up.
Absolutely.
Because without those, just like we go into terminology, you don't even understand. And most important part, everything is situation-based. And so many people do not know their situation. They only know their situation.
Of
And
course.
I think that's the reason why I want to go into the fundamental first.
I agree with that. And, I think it's always important because nothing ever matters to anyone until they have a reason for it to matter, right?
All right.
So if we don't point out the issues, the problems with just a typical arrow flight, how an arrow flies and what affects an arrow, if we don't identify the negatives, we can never alter them to fix them, and we can't find value in a product or a system or anything if there's no reason for it. You know what I mean?
I absolutely agree. I mean, it's so true. At which reason, when you suggest that we do this, I absolutely agree. And I put in some ideas or pointers. So that's the reason we're doing what we're doing. And you're not the first one who suggested this. I did similar thing with a company called Exodus with Cameron and Cameron Dia. I think we did a pretty decent job, but in a very low level. In more of a product level, I think with you, I would like to go into the fundamental principle level. Because I think your customer may not want to learn this, but for the few people who want to learn this, they're going to dig into it real good. They're going to eat it up because they, like a few of my customers say, I never thought I knew physics or math. I say, well, you like it? You like archery? You're going to love this.
Just to catch you guys up, Dorge and I just had like a beautiful 15-20 minute conversation about math and its uses in the real world, and how it's really unfortunate that a lot of kids today grow up thinking that math isn't important or they're never going to use it. So for those of you, like Dorge said, who are into hunting, archery, it doesn't even have to be hunting. It could just be shooting. And even if you like target shooting with guns, math and science completely play a part in that.
Because you want consistency, you want the reason behind it, and you want accuracy. And without those, just like The only way a calculator give you 1 + 1 not equal to 2 is that when the battery's off.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Um, so I think it's important to point out, you and I, we've known each other, from a business standpoint for I think like 2 years now, roughly. I've bought some stuff from you. I've used some
Mm-hmm.
of your products, and we've kind of been building our relationship as we go. And one of the big things that I talked to you about in the early days was how because I have a background in math, I have the ability to understand a little bit of what is being said in your research.
Mm-hmm.
For our listeners, your research can be found on your Firenock website, firenock.com. There's a
Mm-hmm.
tab at the top that says support. You can go down there all the way at the bottom, and there's a whole bunch of the
But
catalogs, and
yeah,
then there's
catalog and
and
operator results and so on. I mean, I was pretty fortunate. I got Tony Warden and I got other people, especially the Exeter boys. They did a really good job. They did a I lend them my high-speed camera. I got a Fastech 3500. It'll give me 15,000 frames per second camera. We did a lot of research, and the gentleman out of Vital Limit, Dave Murphy, he also did quite a bit of experiment. So those videos are available, but you have to look for it because I don't really want to promote that much about it. I'm more interested in teaching. You notice that more of my products are not sold in box stores because how do I say it? I don't want my product to be sold by people who don't understand it,
Mhm.
which is really sort of sad. Just like you bought a brand new Ferrari and you want to drive it like a Honda Accord. What's the point of buying it?
Right. And it's not. I mean, look at we'll use cars for example because you brought it up. The more prestigious a brand is, the harder it is for you to own a dealership. You know what I mean? And the less of them
Of
there are
course.
around because they want to make sure that the more luxury, I guess you could say, a vehicle is, the more precise they want their salesman to be and the clientele that they receive. So my biggest thing is when we talked about this in the early days, how the information is great. The information on your website is awesome, but sometimes it could be a little bit more advanced than I don't want to offend anyone, but then the typical hunter is really willing to take the time to understand, right?
Yes, and that's the
And
reason I got a whole series of lectures, but then it is more like a junior level college physics lecture. I mean, even I got my daughter to tone it down to 11th grade English. But if you don't have background in physics, you don't got your say grade one or your sophomore and junior physics, you're not going to understand the terminology,
right.
which is unfortunate.
It is. And it's my goal, and I think it's our goal here, for us to share all the information that's important, but also share it in verbiage that is a little bit easier for everyone to understand. And
Absolutely.
I'm hoping that I can do that.
Yeah, and then not to mention over the years, I did learn to use what commonly known to others and apply them in the physics and theory what not I come up with. I try to use them to do what I want them to do.
Right. No, and that's great. And I'm the kind of person, I need evidence. I need some
Mhm.
kind of backing to something. And seeing the research, the Tony Warden research that you have, and the science behind everything. When I read that and I look at it, I go, you know what? That makes sense.
Mhm.
And then after I read it, I say, why the hell didn't I think of that? So
Well, we all learn from each other. I mean, just like a lot of the information, a lot of the verbiage I use today is because talking to customer like you before, and then you give me some idea, and some customer like, oh, your aero concept is like a power driver. I say, oh, what? It is a pipe driver. I say, that's quite true. That's the reason all these years of talking to people, I learn from smart people like yourself, and then I'm able to tone the language down to a common language. It is not that the theory changed. It's that now people will be able to relate. That's the magic word. You'll be able to relate and understand. And this is the reason I think this episode is going to be very exciting to a lot of people because there's no big words. It's going to be, we are going to using related knowledge to pass the knowledge that we try to convey.
and that's exactly our goal. And I will do my best that if there's a vocabulary used that I don't understand, I'll ask
And
you to
just stop me,
maybe.
and I will try to find other words
Perfect, perfect.
or a scenario that you can understand.
Yeah. So now that we've kind of laid out the foundation for what we're looking to do here, and this could be as little as 15 episodes, it could be as many as 50 episodes. Quite frankly,
It doesn't matter, whatever
I
it
don't
takes.
I don't know, whatever it takes. So we're gonna be posting these on YouTube pretty much relatively right away, but we're gonna hold off on posting them on our podcast to after the season when people are looking for information like this.
Well, it doesn't matter. I mean, I
Yeah.
will link it to my website as we agreed. People are going to find out this. Sometimes you take multiple angles to explain the same situation and phenomenon,
Mm-hmm.
and some people will pick up one or the other. It's not one is better. It is different people, a different mindset, a different approach, and different skill set to understand it. And that's the reason when you suggest me, I absolutely agree. And I instantly jump on the opportunity because this is just another way for me to explain, which I think is more critical than most people can imagine. Because see, unlike most of the guys, I'm freaking old. and this knowledge is gonna die with me. My kids is not gonna go with archery. So if I don't teach this, all these 45 US patents I have, what am I gonna do it? I'm not gonna sell them. I don't believe in just how do you say it? I don't really need the money in some way,
Mm-hmm.
but I enjoy the sharing.
You have the
I know it
knowledge,
sounds
and you feel like since you have it, you feel, I don't want to say obligation, but for lack of a better word, you feel the obligation to share it because you have it.
exactly. But I'm not gonna just quote unquote let people rob me.
Right. No, I agree with you completely, and I think hopefully our listeners here kind of agree with that. So
Well, most
well,
people who have structure, who have true integrity and character would agree. But I can't say to all. We know how the archery world is.
I like the way you put that. So
Okay, let's go into it.
yeah, so before we dive into it, why don't you give the listeners just a quick background of who Dorge is, what Firenock is, and kind of just how Firenock became a company.
Okay, well, two, 2025 went through a divorce and bankruptcy. I used to run a company, C4SI. We are a consulting company. At one point, we got 13 offices in 7 states. I got up at one point highest, I got 543 employees. So we do most of the system integration. I went through academic. I do got my nuclear chemistry, computer science, linguistic, marketing as my basic academic. Those are all bachelor degrees. Then I went through WEME programs. Then I got my PMP, my MSc, and Novell 3Com. I did went through the CPA, CISA, technical all the technical stuff. Then I went through pre-law, and then I just simply do consulting all my life. And then after the divorce, I just got bored. I hunted 107 days in 2005.
Sounds like a great year.
Yeah, because I have nothing better to do. I went through a bankruptcy and divorce. And I tell to my current wife, I got bored. They say, we have enough money? I say, well, based on all the software I wrote before in my previous life, we were going to be okay. But I would like to do something. Next thing you know, I use what I have learned when I was a DoD with the Instant Runway project, which is the U.S. and British Joint Force Marine project that was supposed to go into the instant runway for the Marines.
Mhm.
The British is one who's going to make the Gatling gun. Gold tip is going to come with the arrow and tip, and I'm supposed to come up with the Firenock portion. So I have what they call it the original material MLOC, which I come with the file, the computers, and so on. And most people will never have an idea how complicated that process is. And I will don't bore you on that. It is a multi-million dollar project. But then the night vision go Gen 3 and Gen 5 comes out. It's no longer needed. So we just simply go and just sit idle. And I finally used the model, and I got On Technology to build me the computer. I got a company in New Jersey to build me the switch, the actual switch. And then I got the New Jersey company to build a switch, a New York company to build me the connector. And that's the first Firenock. And then to make things short, I mean, next day went to a lawsuit. I pretty much lawsuit with every single major company, Eastern, G5, New Archery product, you name it. So my law do help, but just put this way, it is not a comfortable thing. So after everything's said and done, Firenock started. One thing led to the other. I had a lot more, talked to a lot more customer. Every time I do a trade show, when I come back, I got more questions, more answers. Next thing you know, more products. Firenock, Aerovane, shaft, insert, you name it. Next thing you know, 45-year utility patent later, here's Firenock with me alone.
I love that, and honestly, I love the name. It's just fire. It's like It's just very intriguing, you know?
Well, actually, you think about it. Fire, the word, is one of the most exciting thing as a human, because we are the only thing that actually conquer fire.
Right.
And then when you light up with fire, that's the reason, unlike other company, our fire nut is red.
Right.
And I mean, just like when I learned the fire nut light, I was talking to Indiana University Optometry School. Uh, because that time, Patrick Ng, one of my friends, was with Thomas School. I got the linkage and go to talk to an optometrist and learn about lights. The fact is that normal human will only see red on red the best, which also explains why the tail light is red with a
Right.
red bulb. Remember,
Sure.
it's not just a lens; it's the lens and the light, which
Right.
is exactly why in the final it's a red LED with a red lens, which is the
Yeah.
nut.
You know, and the listeners are getting a little bit of a spoiler alert here because eventually what we're going to do, and we've talked about this, is first we want to talk about obviously aeroflight, the problems, the science of aeroflight, and then we're going to go into each individual component that you offer for the arrows, for the bows, and so on, and just kind of go down the list and talk about the problem it addresses, how it addresses it, and you know the different options you have and why you offer those options. So this.
Absolutely. I think that would be that would this is what our original plan out with the Exodus boys. They did a pretty good job. I think I want you to do a better job from a different take, because I
Yeah,
notice your listener is a different group. That's the reason with your help we're able to sort of spread this knowledge base even more. That everybody got a taste of it. Whether you like it or not, hey, it is a podcast. If you don't like it, you can always turn it off.
absolutely. And the podcast that Dorge is referring to is the Deer Gear podcast with Cameron Durr. And Cameron Durr he's the media guy for Exodus. I actually had them on the YouTube channel way back when we first started. I think it was almost a year ago now, which was a lot of fun. They're great guys over there. If you guys have any problems or need anything, give them a call and they can help you out with whatever you need. Also, great guys over there. So now that we've kind of laid out what we want to talk about and a little bit of who you are and how Firenock came to be, why is it so important to talk about arrow flight and the arrow? Why is it so important to talk about it in detail? Like, why should our listeners care about what happens when an arrow flies?
Well, actually, that's where to be frank with you think about it. The arrow itself is the carrier. That's what actually carry the broadhead and transfer the energy from your hand to the bow to quote unquote the animal and kill it. So the entire behavior of the aeroflight is pretty much as important as the tires to the car. I mean, you can imagine this. You've got one of the best car. You got rims and you have no tires. How good
or
you
the
going to
or the
drive?
or the wrong tires.
Oh yes, exactly. I mean, it's not that you just the size fit do not mean the right tires. Just imagine yourself driving in summer trying to racetrack with winter snow tires on. What do you think is going to happen? Or in the winter, instead of snow tires, have your high preferential slick on it. You won't make the first corner, I can guarantee you.
Yeah, I mean, I was blown away as a kid when I went to the car dealership, and we just happened to see a Viper sitting there, a Dodge Viper, and the tires have no treads on them.
Yes,
They're basically smooth, and
correct.
that was my first um, recollection or memory of realizing that there were different tires for different jobs. The same way, there's got to be different arrows for different people.
Not just
Just
that, just
or
on a
different
single arrow.
applications.
Absolutely. Just on a single arrow shaft, how you cut it, how you build it is going to be different. But we need to know the fundamentals, which is where this podcast we're going to discuss. Because in most cases, most people do not know the five fundamental movement of an arrow when you launch it, and how each of them affect the final result of how the arrow flies, impacts, and launches. And
And
that's the reason I want to talk about that as the beginning of this, because we want to go down to the principle, the behavior of how the arrow behave in what form. Now, just remember, those are fundamental movements. It do not mean every single arrow are dominated by those, but they will be dominated by one of them based on a specific application, and each of them can override each other based on speed, power, and reaction, and also application.
all right,
But
all right.
the five principles do not change.
So the five principles are always there. It's just how much each of those principles affect an individual arrow.
In
Ba-
flight.
That'll vary, but there'll always be
Correct.
some amount of all 5 of them.
Right. It is the
Okay.
same thing. I mean, I'll use car as an example. If you only drive 55 miles per hour, what's the shape of the car have to do with it? Pretty much minimum. And then with the condition of the weather change, that's going to have a major impact. But
Sure.
if you are driving 120 miles per hour, well, the dominant factor is no longer just horsepower.
Yeah.
It becomes the shape of the car. I
Right.
mean, this thing happened. I'm going to use car a lot because some way I'm a car guy.
Yeah, and I've had the luxury of having like a sports type car when I was younger, and
Hmm.
now I drive a pickup truck, and I promise you, I know when I'm going 85 miles an hour in my truck. Sometimes I would look down when I was in my sports car and I'd be going almost 100. I'd be like, "Whoa, I need to tone it down just a little bit," you
Absolutely.
know. And it's my understanding, just to kind of put it into my own words, the importance of learning about aeroflight. It's because we as hunters, we go to the range, we practice, we spend thousands of dollars on our bows and our setups and our releases and whatever else that we have. We spend all this time practicing, and we are creatures of control. Humans are creatures of control. But the moment we pull the trigger on our release, we have zero control left. The
Correct.
only thing that we have is the trust that our arrow is going to behave the way we expect it to every single time.
Yep.
And
You know what? Mhm.
the only way we can ensure that is to make sure that our arrow is built properly.
Correct. I mean, it is. I remember the time that I first talked to a very smart customer of mine, and he happened to be a retired sharpshooter. I say that you get custom rifles, right? Do you buy off the shelf box bullets? I say, of course not. I say, why not? I can't trust them. They're not reliable. They're not exactly to what I need. I say, and you reload. And I bet your reload equipment is more expensive than your guns. You say, you bet. You say, when you buy so just expensive arrows, when you cut them, when you build them, what kind of effort you put into it? Oh, I grain scale measure them. I say, then you have to trust that your bullets, your shells, your powders are exactly up to par. And you put them exactly the way you should be. How do you do that? How do you know your arrow is doing that? Then he started looking at me like, what are you talking about? I said, exactly. Do you understand what each of them do? He said, not really. I say, with a bullet, do you expect your bullet that put in front of you are perfectly concentric and perfectly weight balanced? He said, they are. I say, how about your archery equipment, your inserts? What did that do to your shaft? How about your shaft behavior? And just a simple shaft behavior. How is your shaft going to behave when you apply power? In what way are you behaving? And all of a sudden, all the light bulbs goes on.
Yeah.
You say, you're right. And then let me learn this. So next thing you know, a few short matters. Back in 2016 is first I start doing lectures. And I remember vividly Rod White, the two-time Olympic gold and silver medalist, and he said, Dorge, you're right. You need to teach people this because until they understand the fundamental principle and the behavior of an arrow shaft, all the rest are minor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, I'm just going to point it out for the listeners. What you basically just did is you took something that this gentleman knew nothing about and related it to something he knew everything about. And once you did that, you gave him the reason to care. You know what I
Correct.
mean?
And
So
that's what I hope this series will do.
exactly. And I urge the listeners, I understand the way the hunting industry works. You find something that works, it's worked for you forever. Why change? And I get it. My dad was the same way. My uncle's the same way. My brother's the same way. It is what it is.
I
But,
don't disagree. You know what
right.
the thing is that this is where the problem is. Let me sort of give you back a little bit history. Do you know the archery industry as a whole technically have not changed until the magic number 2028? 2008. You know what actually changed?
Um, was it I'm just going to take a guess here. Was it the introduction of the carbon arrow?
It is we finally able to shoot over 300 feet per second actually.
Ah, okay.
So aerodynamics kicking in, and people try to get faster and faster. Think about it. If you shoot what actually worked, why do you buy a new bow?
Yeah,
If the new bow is different from previous, how do you guarantee whatever worked before will work now?
that's a great question.
I
That's a
mean, you
great
say
question.
stick with what you know well. So the first thing you do is that do not change your bow. Then whatever you work worked. When you change your bow, how do you know that whatever worked before will work now?
You don't.
And did you need to learn new set of skills to make what you work now work? And when
No,
it don't work, you just throw things at it until it sticks.
right.
That's what a lot of people did. They will buy 3, 4, 5 dozens of arrows until it sort of worked. They will minus weight, add more veins, longer veins until it worked.
Now let
During
me
the process, what are you really doing?
now let me ask you this, and we're definitely going to get into this in one of the later episodes. So a simple yes or no is more than good enough for now. Do you think by changing the shaft, adding weight, removing weight, weight on the front, weight on the back, aren't they essentially just addressing these five motions of the arrow flight without understanding that they're changing the five motions of the arrow flight?
Not just that, they actually, in most cases, is that they trying to make the bow not go over 270 feet per second.
Gotcha. And that number right there is special, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be talking about it a lot, and yeah, we're definitely going to touch on that moving forward. But what I'm trying to get at for the listeners is just try to listen to this with an open mind, because if you apply the stuff that we're talking about to anything other than arrow flight, I promise you it's going to make sense. If you apply it to shooting a rifle, if you apply it to driving a car, anything that moves quickly, you can apply this information to planes, helicopters, whatever. So just listen with an open mind as if it's not hunting related, and I promise you you're going to hear something new, and whether it's for you or not, that's your choice to make. But don't dismiss the information before you hear it. That's all I'm asking you to do. All right. So now we're getting into the five motions of arrow flight. As we said, an arrow is a projectile in flight.
Mm-hmm.
It's controlled or steered by the vanes on the back.
Mm-hmm.
How much is up for discussion depending on who you talk to, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that when we talk about the vanes. Again, once your arrow is in flight, you don't have a pin straight object flying through the air. There are things happening. And
Correct.
this is where those five fundamental movements of an arrow in flight come into play. These five motions are parabolic motion,
Mm-hmm.
torsion,
Mm-hmm.
center ovalization,
Mm-hmm.
circular expansion and contraction,
Mm-hmm.
and lastly, microflex.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, after talking with you, just to preface this, I think the microflex, in my opinion, is the most interesting out of all of this. Be,
Absolutely. And it
be,
happened especially with a high lead of compound bow and also high power crossbow. It is a big deal.
Exactly. So starting at the very top, you kind of answered this already. My first question was, before we even get into what the five motions are all of these happening simultaneously from the moment you release the arrow to the moment it impacts?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And they all interact with each other. And that's the reason, just because you have the same arrow, same weight, out of the same bow, depends on how the front of center, the vanes, the shaft, diameter, material, all five can steer. You can shift from one way to the other. And in some actions, motions are more important, but I'll tell you, every single action is bad.
Okay.
So you want to minimize it.
Yeah, because anything that pulls away from perfectly straight is going to affect the arrow essentially, right? The
Not
same.
just that, you eat up the energy in flight.
Gotcha. That's
You
right.
actually you consume the energy in flight. Some
Okay.
of them more than other in specific conditions, and we'll go into that on each. But let's talk about the five motions.
Yes.
Everybody know what a parabolic action is. The reason that we need the parabolic action because it is a freaking arrow. If the arrow do not parabolic action, it become a bolt, a
Okay.
true bolt.
And for the listeners, what is a parabolic motion?
It's the front and back of the arrow. You see, the arrow is always weighted in the front, and that's also weighted in the back. It's the knock plus the vein. So that is a static weight there. That's a static weight in the front. When you have two static weight being compressed, the shaft in the middle will go up and down, and that up and down process is called parabolic action.
Okay.
Now, it depends on how much force in the front and back, the magnitude of the parabolic action. That means the how much the arrow flex in the middle is based on the spine and the force being applied, and how much resistance force in the front.
Okay. So essentially, the FOC or the weight that you're putting up in the front of the arrow is going to
And the
affect
weight on the
this,
back,
and
and
the weight in
also
the
the
back.
spine resistance and the
Okay.
diameter of the shaft.
So it's a lot of different factors
Yes, and also
going
how
into
the
this.
arrow is being constructed. Because see, the moment if the arrow flex up, it's not just flexing. That's the first motion we talk about. And depends on how the arrow is constructed. On the multi-layer construction, you instantly have not just the flex up to start with, you also have the twisting, which is torsion. The front and back begin to twist opposite direction, back and forward.
Right. Yeah.
See, that two actions happen simultaneously. And
Right.
in the case of carbon arrow, the flex is not a neutral plane, which is like most people when they think of arrow flex. The high point, they say the high point of the arrow is 12 o'clock, then the low point is at 6 o'clock. Answer is that is absolutely not. Those arrow doesn't exist.
Right. Now, I'm going to pause you real quick. What Dorge is trying to say is that the general acceptance or the general consensus out there is that an arrow is going to flex. I don't even have anything to use here to represent it. But the general idea is that it's going to flex completely 180 from each other. So if
Hmm.
so take a pen, for example. It's going to flex from 12 to 6 and flex perfectly this way. But
No,
that's
no,
not
no. Let's
true.
put it this way.
Up and down.
Right. That is
Okay.
what people assume. Now, that is true in the case of aluminum arrows.
Okay. And
And
that's where
it's
they're
also
perfectly
true
extruded, I think you
extruded.
said,
And
right?
it's
Okay.
also true in some of the early Beemans because they're extruded.
Okay. And now with the carbon arrows, you're looking more at like 12 o'clock to 7 o'clock or 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock, I believe,
Or
right? Or
if the
4
arrow
o'clock.
go to 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock, now imagine the arrow going to flex on an arc between 12 and 3. How would the arrow flex going to be? It is going to be offset elliptical.
Right. And it's going to be erratic, right? It's going to
Very
be.
likely. Those are not arrows. Those are tomato sticks.
Now, for those of you who want to follow along with this information, like I said, you can go to firenock.com. You can click on the tab at the top that says support. Click on that, and you can go right to the catalog. Scroll all the way to the bottom. The catalog is right in there, and everything is listed for you. But there's also a spot on the website next to the support tab that's a research tab that's titled Aero Flight 101. And that has like the real meat and potatoes, just short and sweet. But never mind the wording. There's a lot of diagrams on here that look really nice. And they kind of just give a visual to some of these abstract concepts that we're talking about. Now, when the arrow starts to flex, is it flexing on center? So basically, is that flex always happening around a center point, or is this rotation, oscillation, flex
It's an
offset?
orbital spin. That's where most people don't understand. It's an orbital elliptical spin. So
Okay,
the center is actually, imagine this. You're going to draw an arc between, say, it's going to flex between 12 and 7 o'clock. So you're going to not draw a line, you're going to draw an arc between 12 and 7. The center point of that arc is where the flex center is going to be. Now imagine arrow going to flex through this center. As it flexes, it's not from top to bottom, it's from top to the side in an arc.
right.
Now to
And then
make
an
this
arc
even more
again.
yep, and then you go again when you do it. To see, remember the arrows are rotating
Mm-hmm.
and the arc is forming. Now to make things worse, on all the carbon arrow, the front and the back are twisting, torsionally.
Mm-hmm. And
So
that's the next one we're gonna get to. The torsion
correct.
there.
Which is a lot of times people say, "Oh, like look at me! I shot the arrow. The arrow, the vein go to the left and go to the right and go to the left and go to the right." Guess what they are visualizing? Because there's more weight in the front, so it's stable. When the arrow flexes, the torsion of the arrow gives you the visual of the vein turning left and right.
Right.
Because the arrow shaft, when it flexes, it's twisting also.
Right. That's really cool. It's kind of like I know it's for different reasons, but it's kind of like when you look at a rim of a car driving down the road, it looks like it's spinning backwards instead of forwards. You know,
Well,
that
actually, this
optical
is
illusion.
actually it's not optical illusion. It's actually happening. You
Right.
get torsion and flex. That's the reason when you see an arrow actually behave like that. Can you imagine the aerodynamics? That's the reason the magic 270 feet per second is so critical. Because when it's doing that, as long as the aerodynamic is not a dominant factor, you can still fly decent.
Right. You know, and that goes back to cars. Obviously, the faster you're going to drive a car, the more aerodynamic you need. There's a reason why Formula One guys aren't driving F-150s down the track. They're
No
low.
kidding.
They're low to the ground. They're very sleek. The air flows over them, and they're able to move. The air that they're moving through affects the car less than if
All
it
right.
was a box truck driving down the road.
Let me give you some numbers I learned when I was doing racing, or learning about racing. At 175 miles per hour, a Formula One engine spends 72 to 78% of the power for air resistance.
That's incredible.
Now, let's think about it at 170 miles per hour. At 277 feet per second, 270 feet per second, you are flying just around 200 miles per hour.
Wow.
Okay, so if you go beyond, I mean, of course, the car is a much bigger project, object.
Mm-hmm.
But when you move an arrow, no matter what it is, up to a certain speed, the aerodynamic factor is going to kick in very hard.
Right.
And that number is about 270 to 280 feet per second.
Okay. So for someone who isn't really interested in what we're talking about here, to alleviate a lot of these problems, just make sure you don't get your bow over 270 feet per
That's the
second,
reason you shoot a
and you'll be
heavier
okay.
arrow, you shoot a lower poundage. You lower your poundage, you shoot a heavier arrow, and you maintain that. You can pretty much do anything you want with the bow.
Right. So there's options out there for you guys.
Of
You know, this
course.
isn't the only way to go.
No.
Now, how does this parabolic motion, how does it affect the arrow? So we already talked about that it's, it's not flexing through the center of the arrow, it's flexing through the center of its own flex.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about how since
The
it's
torsion.
going and it's moving in all these different directions, it's wasting energy as it goes downrange.
No,
Is
it's
there
not wasting, it's consuming energy.
consuming the energy? Is there anything else that it's doing to the arrow or any other ways? Because I'm going to be asking basically the same questions for each of these 5 motions, because I want the listeners to understand what it's doing to the arrow, what problems it causes, and why it's important to correct it. So
Then the third, I mean, of course, when the arrow flexes. Now, we are talking a basic 29-inch arrow, not a 33 or 34, because you may have more than one parabolic. You have multiples.
right.
We're going to stick with one parabolic for ease of understanding.
And the longer
When
the arrow is, the more parabolics they could have.
it
Is
can be a
essentially what you're
multiples.
getting at.
In other words,
Okay.
it can be a multiples.
Okay.
And when the arrow flexes, assuming that we just flex in one direction, when the arrow flexes, what happened to the center of that flex? The arrow are no longer round. Just like if you got a tube and you flex it, the center part of that round will turn oval. Yep, you can see there's some slight angle.
From
It turned oval
Yep.
immediately.
Yep.
That is called ovalization. But that itself is actually good for the arrow, as long the arrow is large in diameter and thin in the wall, because that is actually a spring now, which means the energy you put in, it's also going to take the energy out.
Okay, so fatter diameter, thinner wall, better arrow.
Correct, always.
Okay.
But you lost durability. You also, I mean, do not lose spine, because see, if you learn in physics on the tube dynamics, the larger the diameter, the thinner the wall, the more it resistant to bend. The thick tube do not. The moment you bend a thick solid tube, it will stay bent. The moment you bend a hollow tube, it will flex back.
Right. No, that makes sense for anyone here who's ever flexed
Now,
like
the
a
same
piece of
thing.
steel or something.
That's the reason a thick walled arrow in thin diameter, it prevents the formation of that oval.
Gotcha. We've talked
So,
about this, and we have talked about this specifically. And when you first told me this on the phone, and I don't want to give it away because we're gonna get into it, but when you told me what happens when you go thinner diameter, fatter wall, and you pointed out like just the basics behind it, I said, "Oh my God, that makes perfect sense."
Because
You know, so
when you flex the shaft, when they turn oval, because it's made of carbon aluminum, or 77,000 aluminum, that whole process is a spring back. So every single flex, the energy is not just consumed, it actually stored. And when you bounce back the flex, it sends back the energy. But if your wall is thick, when you bend it, the energy is consumed because you don't have the bounce back capability.
right.
And of course,
I
depends on how much you flex. The more you flex, the more arrow needed. I mean, that's the reason a thinner spine arrow is a lot worse than a thicker wall high spine arrow.
okay.
Now that's the third motion we talk about.
So yeah, so that is a third motion. So I think we've pretty much touched on the parabolic for now, and then we
Mm-hmm.
can wrap it up here at the end. We've talked about the torsion of the arrow.
Mm-hmm.
For the listeners, torsion is essentially how the arrow twists,
From front to back.
right, from front to back.
It's
And if I'm
resist to twist
and
or
if I'm
twisting
not
itself.
right, and if I'm not mistaken, the front of the arrow and the back of the arrow have opposite torsion, right?
Correct. But remember, the front of the arrow is always heavier. The inertia will plus the vein original turn will cause the arrow to turn a specific direction. But as it turns and as it flexes, the vein will do sudden motion of this. They will do more and more one direction until the arrow shaft stop their parabolic action and the torsion is really much stabilized. And the arrow now go with a very tight elliptical spin.
So let me, because you've said this a couple times now, and I think it just actually clicked. As your arrow leaves the bow, the front is turning one way, the back is trying to turn the other way, and it's trying to stabilize itself in flight. It's kind of doing, one of these as it's going down until it finally stabilizes itself and the front and back start working together. Is that, am I
To a
hearing
certain
that
extent,
correctly? Okay.
yes. And this is where the front of center is not your friend. It becomes your
Okay.
enemy.
Okay.
Because the heavier the front of center, the more the parabolic action is. And in some cases, when you're super heavy, the tail become insignificant. And the arrow itself doing this is doing this.
Right. And from what I understand, and I've heard enough of the Deer Gear podcast that I think I got this down. Most people think that a arrow flexes like a fish, but it more flexes like a snake in flight.
And more like
Am
more like an eel,
like an
which is
eel.
injured.
Okay. But I got that right. I don't have that backwards on that one, right?
Yeah, and then the next portion of the two other motion are really not, they don't apply to most vertical bow guys. It only apply in extreme conditions. Just like when you shoot an arrow into a rock, you will see the oscillations of the arrow shaft. That means from the oscillation circulation, bigger and smaller.
Are
Because
you
when you
talking about
compress them,
like a high speed camera? If you're doing this in a high
correct.
speed camera,
And
okay.
that's the reason you also see when you see sometimes you shoot an arrow into a rock, you notice the arrow shaft go over the shaft and go inside.
Mm-hmm. You're talking
What
about
happens?
the tip of the. You're saying the
The
arrow
tip
goes
will
into itself.
the tip will go into the shaft with the
Mm-hmm.
insert.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine when you hit that moment, the energy is so much, the entire shaft, the energy is now going in and have no way to dissipate it. So one of the energy that the arrow shaft behave because the arrow is wrapped, it's going to behave like a Chinese finger puzzle. It's going to expand and contract.
Right.
When you expand that moment, the arrow, the insert will actually go into the shaft because the diameter of the shaft actually expand and contract.
Okay.
That's the fourth motion.
Expansion and contraction.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the circular expansion, the contraction. Now, is that we just talked about that happening on impact?
Not
When
just
the
impact,
arrow,
it happens
right?
even when you apply force too. And usually that do not happen. That expansion and contraction happen the most when you launch it and when you impact. Those are the two most important points. Does it happen in midsection? Answer is does. But it becomes so minute unless the force is excessive. Like when you're shooting a crossbow, or when you if you impact something really close, and there's an excessive amount of energy on the shaft, not on the front, on the shaft.
And the way I picture this in my head, because I always try to find like a picture or a thought or a concept to kind of link stuff to for it to make sense. The way I think about it is you go to water and
Hmm.
you dip your finger in the water real quick, or you drop a rock in the water. That first
The
ripple,
rippling
that
effect.
the ripples come out, and the first one is pretty quick, and then the first few are pretty close together. But then as the ripple gets farther and farther out, each ring of the ripple, there's a little bit more space between them until that ripple eventually dissipates and goes away.
Yep.
Is that what's happening in flight?
It's actually the reverse.
Okay,
Initially the ripple is out very out, and as you
okay,
go further, it get closer and closer and closer until it dissipates. Yeah, that's what it actually minimize itself,
right.
because it's pretty much trying to find an equilibrium, which is total balance. But unfortunately, let me sort of give you another concept which most people may not know. When did the arrow ever stop flexing?
When does it stop flexing? When it
Hmm.
stops moving.
Yes, that means that even in long distance flight, that is still about 10 to 50,000 flex in the arrow, even over 100 yards.
You're saying over the entire 100 yards? Okay.
So
Obviously,
now,
flexing more in the beginning than it is at the end, of course.
so even the arrow is perfectly stabilized, is flying, it's still it's still a minimum amount of flex, about 10 to 50,000.
So you kind of touched on the next thing here. Before we get into that, again, we talked about the circular, so the ovalization makes sense, right? So just to kind of pause for a second and just go, because my idea for today was to go through each of these one by one, but I'm starting to realize you can't talk about one without talking about at least one
Exactly.
of the others. So I just want to pause here. The torsion, I think, is relatively straightforward to understand.
Hmm.
They're just rotating opposite of each other, and we want them to work as close to each other as possible. That makes sense. Parabolic motion, I think we talked about that pretty well. The center ovalization, this one to me is so interesting because you're talking about not wasting energy. And that's really what we want to do. And a lot of people, not to get too far, because again, we're going to talk about this stuff as we move in deeper through this series. But everyone always talks about how to save energy and how to have the most amount of energy downrange. And therefore, I want the heavier arrow because the heavier arrow is going to retain more energy downrange. And we're not even talking about, we haven't even gotten into what arrow build we're talking about. We haven't gotten into FOC, low FOC. We haven't talked about any of that.
We're just talking basic motions. Because
Exactly.
until we got those down, we can't talk about those. Because until we understand this portion, we can't explain the rest until this five motion is solidly back down. In other words, these five motions, first of all, they are absolutely necessary. Because if the arrow don't flex, the conversion of energy, the transfer of energy from the string to the arrow, it will be too much. The arrow will behave like a bolt, not
So
an
the
arrow.
flex isn't bad. We want our arrow to flex. We
Correct.
just want to control the flex of the arrow.
How it was flexed and how the flex carry itself.
Okay.
Now, the last two motion, which is the circular motion, the circular expansion contraction, and microflex. The microflex usually do not happen until your let off go over 75%, until your force is excessive. Because now, all of a sudden, the microflex begin to form. It is a very, imagine this, every microflex, the frequency is much higher, which means that every single flex is a pure consumption of energy because it's entire flex doing microflex. Just like you would take you a lot more energy to shake your hand really hard, really small, compared to move your hand back and forward. That
So
mini shake is what the arrow do when you have excessive amount of energy on it.
right. Now, just to define two of these terms here, you've used magnitude a couple times, and now you just touched on frequency. For the listeners, frequency, and I hope most people know this already. Frequency essentially means how often something happens,
Correct.
right?
Microflex is having very, very high frequency and it's a
Right.
very short stroke, which means that, and it usually happen for the first 20 yards of the airflight.
Okay.
Which is why when you have a high let-off bolt with a high let-off or high power bolt, the first 20 yards, it do not change much because all the energy are consumed simultaneously in the first 20 yards.
And why is this so important? Because any bow hunter will tell you that most of the shots you end up taking are within 20 yards.
So
You know,
in most
so
cases, if you don't shoot over 20 yards, the microflex, the parabolic action, or the rest don't matter much unless you move to 85% off and a 166. Then it become big deal
okay.
because the entire arrow flight do not finish until you may reach 22, 23 yards.
Okay. And that's something new. We've talked about the numbers and the distances before, but I've never heard a situation where everything, like, you don't have to pay attention to any of this unless you have this and this. So I'm really going to look forward to touching on that.
Yep, we'll talk about it when we go into thinner arrows and the
Absolutely.
behavior. I just give you a hint.
Yeah,
That's
essentially. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
essentially every single size, every single material, every single combination have its optimization capability. The moment you do not follow, in the old days, it's not a big deal because you don't have the speed, you don't have the force, the force curve is not that significant, and the arrow behavior is optimized. You're not dealing with extremes. When I'm
Right.
dealing with extreme, it's like in the old days, if you drive all-season tires, it's not that big a deal. But since you have decided you want high-performance tire in summer, now winter came, you are screwed.
Now you need it. Exactly. And this episode seems to also be turning into kind of like glossary,
Prequel.
like a glossary for the series, So
Yes.
this is really cool, and I'm really glad that we decided to redo this, because anyone who goes back, I don't even think the first episode we did is on our podcast channel anymore. I think it's only on YouTube. And anyone who goes back and listens to that one, I think everyone can admit it. It ended up turning into a pretty quick shit show, So
Well, it's not we talk about everything. It is
yeah,
like two friends talking about thing over a beer, that kind of deal.
exactly, and it was great, but I also think it was important because it showed us, okay, if we really want to do this, this is the way it needs to be done.
Exactly. Remember when you finish, I talked with you, and we both agreed. The last show is too much area without any detailed background on it, and that's the reason I think let's go with a much better structured. It will
Yeah,
be much better in so many ways.
exactly. It's not how fast you run the race; it's just get there, right? So,
Now we got a structure, we got a bump, we got a strip now, so
exactly.
much better. And then yes, a lot of people do not recognize the microflex. I'll guarantee you, if you're a Western shooter, the microflex is such a big deal.
Yeah,
And also it has a such big impact on a high let off compared to low let off. I can assure you.
and
I mean,
that's going to be the one that shakes things up, because
oh yes, big time.
everybody wants a higher let off. They want to be able to hold the bow as long as possible, which I understand. I don't have an issue with that, but you also need to understand that it's going to cause issues, and you need to have the proper equipment,
Yep,
right,
and then
to
you don't
overcome
just
that.
like I'll give you a glossary. If you're shooting, say, an 85% let off with a 166, and you're shooting something like a 15% FOC, and you're shooting a deer, say, at under 15 yards, you won't get a pass through. And I would just stop there, and then we'll talk about
Yeah,
that later.
yeah. So, frequency is how often something happens. Magnitude, specifically when we're talking about flex, is how far away from center that flex
So
that
it's the
arrow ends
magnitude.
up
How much is
flexing.
how much of the parabolic action the flex is? Which also, just for terminology, it is called in the arrow is called the initial spine rating. The spine rating on the AMO, which has become the ATA standard, is that at 28 inches, you drop a 1.94 pound or 1.92 pound on the middle, and the amount of inches, thousands of inches that the arrow drop is the spine number of the shaft, which means that if you are 300 spine, that means at 28-inch apart with a 1.92 pound weight, the arrow will flex from center down to 300 thousandths of an inch, and that's your spine number.
I love that. I'm such a nerd for the numbers, man. I really am. All right. So we've talked about the 5 motions. We've talked about what they do, what they look like. So now when we talk about them and what they do to the arrow, the listeners have some kind of background knowledge on what it is that we're talking about. So what kind of issues are these 5 motions causing to an arrow? Like, for example, you just said there are certain builds that if you shoot under a certain yardage, you're not going to get the pass through you're looking for. Okay,
because the
that's
arrow
no
haven't get straight yet. The
right.
arrow is still in very bad parabolic. When you stop one end, let me step back and give you one hint of how critical and how ridiculous this becomes. Name a projectile we human make that flex is parallel, front to back.
That's parallel.
Mm-hmm. That meant to flex. That is front to back. That's parallel, not tapered. You couldn't.
Pasta.
No, pasta is not meant to flex.
No, I know. I'm being silly. I'm being silly.
The fact is that we never make anything that meant to flex. That's not
Right.
tapered. Do you know why they're tapered?
I
Because
don't.
we always hold one end. Your golf clubs, your pool cue, your fishing rods, they're all like that.
Oh my goodness.
But
And we
then,
hold the thicker end.
correct. But when the arrow is flying, it flexes on both ends. And which way end is anchored? In most cases, there's two nodes on both sides. The node on the nock and the node on the arrow point side. As we increase the front of center so much, it now behaves like a handle and shit begin to fall.
Oh, I like the way you just worded that. That's really great. Now, I wasn't going to go there today, but just real quick, the node essentially is the point, the one specific location on that the arrow
Which
flexes
is the
on.
axis, which is the what you call the axis or the what do you call it? The axis of that flex. The arrow have two of them
Right.
because the arrow flex like this.
Yeah, and when
This
anything
point is the axis.
and when anything flexes, the one side goes up and down, the other side goes up and down, but
Opposite.
the point of flex stays in the same place.
Correct. That's called
So
the axis. And in the case of arrow, that's called the node.
right,
And the
and
arrow have two of them.
the node is extremely important. Again,
Yes.
something we're going to touch on later on down the road in the future.
I think that we have enough for people to digest.
Yeah. So my big question is, again, why should the listeners care about this?
Because
Why?
if you really want to say, I mean, I push it to the extreme. When I have my expedition eccentric SDs, I had the SD6. My actual arrow speed was 355 feet per second. My draw weight was 68 and a 3/4 pound, and my actual drawing was 29 and 3/4. My arrow weight is 347 grain. The benefit of it is that I can do up to 37 yard with one pin.
Right.
Do you need that? No. But if you really want to push it, can you imagine going to ASA or IBO and do 35 yard?
And I mean, but that's what science is all about, right? Finding a
You
limit
can actually push it.
and pushing the limit to see how far you could go. You know, and if you go back and look at one of the YouTube videos I posted in the past, it was about the arrow concept build. Someone once said to me that the arrow system was pushing arrows farther than they were ever designed to go. And to an extent, I agree, but not in the negative perspective. The arrows were only designed to go a certain speed because that's all the bows could make. That's all the bows could put out. Well, now the bows are stronger, faster. You know, you're able to hit these ridiculous speeds, like you said, but we're still using the same arrows that we were shooting when we weren't hitting these speeds. You know, so how do you expect an arrow, like you said earlier, how do you expect to get a better bow that shoots faster, but to shoot the same equipment and expect it to interact the same? Now, the big thing that I've always tried to make a point of, and what I really want the listeners to listen. We're going to wrap this up. I think, like you said, we have enough to digest here. I think we're going to talk after this at some point and decide if we want to do another episode breaking down what we talked about here, or if we want to go into the next 5 things that we want to talk about. But what's important here is the listeners need to understand that, like I said earlier, once an arrow leaves the bow, we have zero control. We can't do anything. We can't take a shot back. And anything in flight has so many variables. We just listed 5, but I would be, if I was a betting man, I would bet that there's significantly more variables that affect the
No,
flight
there's
of an
actually
arrow.
no. Yeah, we're talking shaft only.
Right,
We're not
right,
talking veins. We're not talking broadheads.
right,
We're not talking
right.
nuts.
I'm talking just in general, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel as a hunter, if I'm going to go out in the woods and I'm going to shoot a projectile at a living animal and I'm trying to stop that heartbeat, I owe it to that animal to know to know for sure that I have the best equipment that's going to um, perform the exact same way every single time. If I know that my arrow is going to flex the same way, it's going to recover at the same rate, it's going to spin at the same rate. If I know all of that stuff is the same from shot to shot, I'm the only variable that I have to worry about.
Correct.
And
And
I
believe me,
feel that that's
building it is
really
not going to be
important.
simple.
It's
And
not. It's
it's not.
not.
But that's the reason that this episode of explaining the 5 basic motion is what I say is a fundamental of what we're going to talk about for the next whatever episodes.
Right.
Because see, you know the 5 motions, every one of the motion is an energy consumption, which means
Everyone
that
consumes energy.
correct, and which also mean one thing: the parasitic loss of an arrow shaft in flight is what the arrow building is about. You want to minimize it.
On a minimum. So you the whole point of building the arrow, to at least doing a custom built arrow, is to
Mm-hmm.
minimize the amount of energy that is lost between launch and impact. So
Correct.
that way we
You
have the
got it.
most amount of energy retained at the point of impact. Because at
Correct.
the end of
You
the
got it.
day, it doesn't matter if you're high FOC, low FOC, balanced, unbalanced, fixed broadhead, mechanical broadhead. It doesn't matter if you don't have the energy when it gets there. It doesn't. It's going to do nothing.
Because it's very simple. At the end of the day, the amount of energy put in on the initial impact, speed and weight is not the only thing that should be calculated. Most people do not understand that. And
Yeah.
most people, even on most of the archery scope, just like Garmin scope, they only calculate speed and weight.
Yes.
They forgot aerodynamic efficiency, parabolic efficiency. Those things are big deal.
Real
I mean,
big.
if you shoot at 270 feet per second, that's what it is. The moment you pass that, the equation shift.
Right.
But like at this moment, I'll just give the lesson and sort of like a taste. When Jim Camp come in 2006, come with RDT 165, that airboat shoot at 420 feet per second.
Is
And
that a
this year,
crossbow? Is it a
yes.
crossbow? Okay.
And this year, the R500, that's shooting at 500 feet per second. In the 10.515, you shoot at 515 feet per second. What do you think the aerodynamic of that arrow is? We're talking over 300 miles per hour.
I'm gonna not knowing because we've never talked about this before. I would imagine that the aerodynamics of that bolt need to be close to perfect.
Exactly. What happened to rotational? The tumbling of the arrow shaft, the elliptical spins, all of them become so critical. The shape of the broadhead, the note.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
And
all of them become. I mean, I didn't want to. I just wanted to give you a hint. So a
mm-hmm.
lot of things we talk about today. If you're a vertical bull shooter, only the first three action matter to you. If
Okay.
you're shooting a super high let off, long draw, all 5 matters. If you're shooting off the first 4 matter more, when you're shooting a crossbow over 400 or 380 feet per second, all 5 matters. Because of parasitic loss, as we have discovered in the case of a Raven, I'll just say it out. On the Raven Alpha 29X, theoretically, you can lose up to 48% of the energy at 100 yards. But then you start with 220. So you're still at 110. So how much matter does it? Well, then it's for you to decide.
Well, I mean, it's the accuracy. To me, granted, I care about the energy. Don't get me wrong. But I want to know that every time I shoot an arrow, it's going to go exactly where I aimed, or as close within my ability level.
Yep, we're going to talk about it on each in the arrow size, each of
Yes.
the design build, because I will guarantee you, some of the build, the arrow is not going to hit where you aim.
Yeah, no, I agree. And if anybody wants
And
a little
even if
spoiler
it hit
alert,
where you aim, the arrow won't do what you want it to do.
right? And for anyone who wants a little spoiler alert, head on over to Firenock, go all the way to the top, the tab all the way to the right, the research tab, click on it, and just go look at the pretty graphs that from the Warden research. The beautiful thing about the research is Tony Warden did a fantastic job. Bless his heart, he is retired now and hopefully enjoying his retirement.
Yeah,
But
he's in Canada.
good for him, man. But he did a really great job of explaining all of how the research was done, how the experiment was done, how the data was collected, what products were used. And the beautiful part of it all is he was completely unvested in any of these companies. He didn't have an interest in any of these companies. People called him and asked him to include their products in the test. And he said, I will include it, but if I use it, I'm releasing the results, whatever they are.
Correct, and that's what my agreement. I lent him my my operator system, and I lent him all the equipment that he wanted. I even invested in buying all the rest of the equipment because I want a second. I want a second opinion on all of the above, and I'm glad I did.
Right. And not just a second opinion. Again, someone who's going to be brutally honest and say, I'm not just going to tell you what you want to hear because you helped me get all this stuff. I'm going to give you the truth.
Right.
You
and
can't handle the truth.
All right. Let's stop here. And then we'll go with the next one. I think this one is a good starting episode.
No, this was
customer to really get a feel.
This was great. With that being said, lastly, if you like what you heard today, if you found some value in what you heard, head on over to our podcast network on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify and just leave us a review. If you go over to the Apple Podcast Network, just go on over to the bottom of our profile. A 5-star written review really goes a long way, and it helps us kind of get bumped up to the top when people kind of search for podcasts. Spotify is a little bit easier. All you have to do is go down to the bottom, click a 5-star review. That's all they ask for. Again, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I really hope you found some value in what you heard today. And Dorge and I were really, really, really looking forward to bringing you this series as we go and giving you everything you need to make an educated decision.
For a final note.
Yes.
I always prefer, if you have questions, put it down. We will answer all the questions the best we could on the beginning of the next episode. Because just like when I was doing classes, I can't build until you know the subject matter previously. Otherwise, it's pointless for me to go forward.
Absolutely.
So if you don't understand what we talked about today, the next few episodes is what built on today's as a foundation. So if you have questions, either call me or leave in the comments. We'll try to address them. If multiple people address them, we'll definitely do it as a what do you call it, podcast answer.
Sure.
If not, if you otherwise, you can call me or Chris directly. I would hate to answer the same question over and over and over again, which happened when I first started Firenock. And I would really prefer not doing that because it is a very inefficient way of using my time. I know it's good for you, but it will not be the greatest. And when I got tired of it, nobody benefits.
Yeah. So guys, if, like what Dorge is saying is, if you have a question, reach out. We don't bite. We're, hopefully you like listening to us. And if you like listening to us, I hope you like talking to us too. If you want to reach out to me, you can leave questions directly into my email also. That is wingandtail.chris@gmail.com. You can find me also on Instagram. I'm wingandtail.chris on Instagram, and we have Wing and Tail Outdoors as our whole network, our whole group. You can reach out to me there. Dorge, where can they find you? I know, Firenock.com.
You can usually find
obviously.
me at firenock.com, and then your comments and comment and contact. I'm always there.
Awesome.
All right. If not, I will email you, and or at least I'll point you to one of my research or lectures or a video. Then you can, if you still can't answer the way you want it, and if multiple people think the same way, we'll try our best. We'll explain that again on the next episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? And our goal is to try to start each episode answering the questions you have. So by leaving a comment, by leaving a question, you're helping us help you and make this information as valuable to you as possible. And I'm going to end it on that. Again, thank you so much for joining us. We love to have you. And until next time, remember, success is just a commitment away. Have a great day.
You too. Have a great day.